In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the respiratory system. The job of the respiratory system is to oversee gas exchange, and that's going to be gas exchange between the blood and then also the external environment. We're really going to be focusing on two different gases here that are being exchanged. Oxygen is what we want to bring into the body, and then carbon dioxide is going to be what we want to exit the body. Now, when we look at the respiratory system, the nose is going to be really the only part that we can see from the outside. So this is the only externally visible part of the respiratory system. The nose itself is composed of the nostril and then also the nasal cavity. The nostril is going to be the passageway where things get in and out of the respiratory system. And then the nasal cavity is going to be lined with respiratory mucosa. And what this is going to do is it's going to trap incoming bacteria and then also other foreign debris. And besides that, it is warming the air as it does enter the body. Once the air passes the nose, it's going to enter the pharynx. The pharynx is going to be the passageway for food and air. The pharynx is made up of several different parts. So the air is going to come in, flow down the pharynx, and then it's going to enter the larynx. So the larynx routes food and air into the proper channels. And so you can see the larynx down here in this image. The larynx is going to have this part called the epiglottis. And the epiglottis is going to be responsible for making sure that we don't get food actually passing down into the respiratory system. So epiglottis is going to protect the superior lining of the pharynx. The trachea is going to be the next part of the respiratory system. So I hope you're noticing that all of this is basically a track to get the gases, get the air down into the lungs. So we go into the nasal cavity, we go into the pharynx, then the larynx, and now we're going to have the trachea. The trachea is a very rigid tube. This rigid tube is surrounded by C-rings of hyaline cartilage. So by C-rings, they're not completely closed around. This is the only way the air is going to enter the lungs, and it is lined itself by ciliated mucosa. You can see that in the image right here. These are going to be responsible for propelling mucus and debris away from the lungs. So we don't want that type of stuff to enter into the lungs. The lungs themselves are going to occupy nearly all of the thoracic cavity. So the only exception to this is that they are not taking up the mediastinum. So here we can see one view of the lungs. If we look at them in another view, you can see that, again, they are occupying the majority of the cavity. They are shown here in pink. And besides the fact that they're occupying the majority of this cavity, you can see that there are a lot of veins and arteries that are extending throughout the lungs. The bronchi are going to enter the lungs, and then they're going to divide into smaller and smaller branches, which we call bronchioles. So that's what we're looking at in this picture right here is the bronchioles. Again, they come in and then there's just this branching that's taking place. It's shown in this picture, and you've got the blown up version of it here. And the terminal structure, so at the very end of the bronchioles is where we're going to find the alveoli. These are the air sacs, and that is what's actually going to be doing the gas exchange. So that is the site of the gas exchange involving carbon dioxide and then also oxygen. In this picture right here, we have a close-up look at the air sacs and the capillaries. The job of the air sacs, we said, is gas exchange. So you have carbon dioxide and oxygen that are being exchanged in that location with the capillaries. So the capillaries are carrying blood, and they will be receiving oxygen from the air sacs. So the air sacs are passing oxygen to the capillaries so that they can give it to the blood. And then the air sacs are receiving carbon dioxide from the blood, because carbon dioxide does need to leave our body. So we can see in this image right here, oxygen is going to get passed to the capillaries. Carbon dioxide is going to get passed to the air sacs. The gas exchange is going to occur by simple diffusion through the respiratory membrane. And when we're talking about simple diffusion, this is just because they are moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. So the blood that is here is going to have a lower concentration of oxygen. The air sacs have a higher concentration of oxygen. So it is going to move from that high concentration to the low concentration. So we'll just emphasize here that that is moving from high to low. If we talk about the physiology of the respiratory system, the major function of the respiratory system is that gas exchange, which we've already mentioned. We want to supply the body and its tissues and cells with oxygen, and then we also need to rid the body of carbon dioxide. So this is going to be why when we breathe, we have an inhale where we're bringing oxygen in, and then we have an exhale where we're getting rid of the carbon dioxide. There's 4 distinct events that occur in this process. The first one is going to be pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation is really talking about the air moving into and out of the lungs, and this is really to refresh that air that's present in the alveoli. Remember, those are the air sacs, and that's where the gas exchange is actually going to be, and we need to refresh the air that's actually there. So pulmonary ventilation, very simply, this is the breathing process, the inhale and the exhale. External respiration. This is going to be when the gases are exchanged between the pulmonary blood and then also the alveoli. So we call it external, which means exit, and this is when the blood and the body exterior are exchanging gases. Respiratory gas transport is going to be step number 3. Respiratory gas transport is when the oxygen and carbon dioxide, they must be exchanged and transported to and from the lungs and the tissues of the body. This is going to be via the bloodstream. So this is the bloodstream taking the oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. The last one is going to be internal respiration, and internal respiration is really at the very tiny level. This is looking at the tissues and cells of our bodies. So this is at the systemic capillaries. Gas exchanges must be made between the blood and then those cells of the tissues. So internal, between the blood and the body's interior. So those are the 4 stages of the respiratory physiology, or the actual gas exchange that is taking place to supply the body with oxygen and then also to rid the body of carbon dioxide. We talk about the mechanics of the process. Well, first of all, there's going to be volume changes, and volume changes lead to pressure changes. And that's a key part of this, is that volume changes lead to pressure changes. And this is going to lead to the flow of gases that is going to be done to equalize the pressure. So it is about equalizing pressure. Inspiration is going to be the air flowing into the lungs. So this is really the inhaling process. And when we inhale, everything is going to expand. So we do have a change in the lateral dimensions of the lungs, which you can see in the picture here. This inhale, this inspiration, this is going to increase the intrapulmonary volume. So this increase in volume is going to lead to a lower pressure inside the lungs because we have that greater volume there. Now, after inspiration, we are going to have expiration. So expiration is where the air is leaving the lungs. And when air leaves the lungs, we're going to get this relaxation where we get a decrease in the volume. So the intrapulmonary volume is going to go down when we're talking about expiration. And when that volume goes down, that's going to lead to a higher pressure in the lungs. So we can see that in the picture here. We inhale, notice that the pressure goes down, and then we exhale and the pressure is going to go up because we're getting a smaller volume in that case. So here's just a comparison of the two. Again, we inhale and we get a larger volume. That means the pressure goes down. And then we exhale, and that's going to decrease that volume. And when we decrease the volume, pressure goes up. So again, it is about pressure changes and then really equalizing those pressures later. When referring to respiratory volumes and capacities, we have a number of different terms that we use. The tidal volume is designated TV. This is going to be the volume of air that is typically taken in during just normal breathing. Not deep breathing, but just normal everyday breathing. The inspiratory reserve volume, the IRV, is the volume of air that can be taken in forcibly. So if we really take in all the possible air that we can take in. Now, as a rule, a person can inhale much more air than they typically do during a normal tidal breath. So typically, we're just taking in a little bit of that overall volume that we could inhale. The expiratory reserve volume, the ERV, this is the volume of air that can be forcibly exhaled. And then the residual volume is the volume of air that remains in the lungs and it cannot be exhaled. So what that means is that we're not actually exhaling every last little bit of air that we do have inside the lungs. The vital capacity, VC, this is the sum of the tidal volume, the inspiratory reserve volume, and then also the expiratory reserve volume. So all of those together is going to be the vital capacity. Here we have a look at just a comparison of these different volumes and capacities. We said that the tidal volume is typically what we're bringing in, but it's certainly not all that we could bring in. You can see that really the capacity of the lungs is way up here if we brought in every last little bit and talked about every last little bit that could go into the lungs and really fill them up. At the same time, you can see that we do have extra air left in the lungs when we do exhale everything out of there. Or when we exhale as much as we can out of there, there's still going to be some residual volume, some air that's left in. All of these together give us the total lung capacity. Looking at this up close, if we talk first about the external respiration. External respiration is pulmonary gas exchange. This is exchanging gases between the alveoli, the air sacs, and the blood capillaries that are right there. The goal of this is to get oxygen into the blood and then get carbon dioxide out of the blood and back into the lungs so that we can get rid of it to the environment. You can see that the oxygen here is going to go into the capillaries by simple diffusion, and it's going to get bound by the hemoglobin that's present in the red blood cells. And then the carbon dioxide, which is inside the capillaries, is going to move into the air sacs. And this is going to be by simple diffusion. And then the air sacs, once they have that carbon dioxide, again, we can get rid of it back to the atmosphere. The internal respiration on the other side is looking at it down the road where these capillaries are now at the tissue level and they are delivering the oxygen and getting the carbon dioxide back. So notice that when we get the capillaries there at the tissue level, they are giving the oxygen to the cells in the tissues. That again is by simple diffusion because we have less oxygen in those tissues, so it's going to diffuse into the tissues. And then the tissues themselves, they have a buildup of carbon dioxide because of their process of cellular respiration. And that carbon dioxide is going to enter back into the capillaries. It does get converted into carbonic acid when it's there inside the capillaries. And then they're going to be taking it back to the lungs. The control of respiration is going to be done in coordination with the nervous system. There are nerve impulses that are going to regulate the activity of the participants of respiration. So they are controlling respiratory muscles, the diaphragm, external intercostals. All of that is being controlled by different nerves. The image right here is showing us an overview of that process. The breathing control centers are located in the pons centers and the medulla centers, and these will be receiving impulses from the medulla and then also sending nerve impulses out to control the inspiratory muscles. Some non-neural factors that control respiration rate and depth include physical factors, volition, so conscious control. We have emotional factors, we have chemical factors. So a lot of different things are really controlling our rate of respiration and then also the depth of our respiration. There are some disorders of the respiratory system. One of these is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So this is COPD. COPD is typically going to be correlated with a history of smoking. When we're talking about COPD, they usually exhibit dyspnea. This is difficulty or a labored breathing. There is coughing and frequent pulmonary infections with this a lot of times. The victims, when we're talking about having COPD, they are usually hypoxic. They also retain carbon dioxide, and we have respiratory acidosis because that carbon dioxide tends to remain and build up. Another respiratory disorder is lung cancer. This is the leading cause of cancer death in North America, so it's fairly common. Not all of them are the result of smoking, but about 90% of lung cancer is the result of smoking. You can see here that we do have a cancer mass inside these lungs that we're looking at. If we finish it up talking about some developmental aspects of the respiratory system, the respiratory system certainly begins developing in the womb. And in the womb, the lungs are going to be filled up with fluid. At birth, though, these respiratory passageways are going to get filled with air. Now, at birth, the lungs are not completely formed. It does take a little bit of time after birth to complete the formation of that. Typically, 2 weeks after birth is when we do see the complete forming of the lungs. Infant respiratory distress syndrome, this is when we have underdeveloped lungs in infants. When we have this, the lungs collapse after each breath. Another disorder that we can have is cystic fibrosis. This is a genetic disorder, and this is caused by oversecretion of mucus, and that oversecretion of mucus is going to clog the respiratory passageways. When we have this clogging of mucus, this is going to increase the chances for respiratory infection.